Om Shri Sai Ram. I offer my most humble and loving salutations at the lotus feet of our Divine Lord, Bhagwan Sri Satya Sai Baba. Dear brothers and sisters, talking about Bhagwan and describing life of an avatar itself is a very uphill task. It's a very difficult task. And I feel humbled for getting this opportunity to study the story of Lord Ram and to contemplate on the story of our beloved Sai. And I thank you all for joining me and my brothers to explore these lives and to learn so much from them. It is sometimes overwhelming even to get a glimpse of what Avatar had come and what he has given us. And each time we bring this episode, we are ourselves awed and really overtaken, overwhelmed with gratitude for the amount of grace and love that the Avatar bestowed on all of us. Today we are venturing into another beautiful aspect of the birth of Avatar and what it entails. So let us start this evening's offering with our prayer and we take it from there. So I'll request all of you to please join me in. O Lord, take my love and let it flow in fullness of devotion to Thee. O Lord, take my hands and let them work incessantly for Thee. O Lord, take my soul and let it be merged in one with Thee. O Lord, take my mind and thoughts and let them be in tune with Thee. O Lord, take my everything and let me be an instrument to work for Thee. Om Shri Sai Ram and welcome to this evening's episode on the Sai Ram Katha entitled The Divine Birth. I'm sure all of you have read about Lord Ram, all of you know about Bhagwan's birth. So it will be a joy to recapitulate certain facts and figures of this avatar and to understand how avatar comes and what does birth actually uh, mean for all of us. Whenever we look at Bhagwan, I feel it's only because of the divine descent that we are even getting an opportunity to understand how the birth process happens. Otherwise, our limited understanding would have always restricted us to only one method of birth, which is a very physical approach towards progeny. It is hard to digest if I say there was a time in the history of creation when the birth happened without any physical contact. It will be tough for a new generation even to comprehend that can there be such a strong will which can produce a living being in front of you. A manifestation can happen just purely by will, and you don't need anything. neither a body nor a womb, it just happens. And from that time, that era, we came to an era when will with a womb, and then the physical action or physical requirement for having a progeny and child. This, the whole magical concept, has been captured by these two words, as Bhagwan would explain to us. It is called prasava and pravesha. This concept is very interesting, and it is most of the time left only for the birth of divine. Like we have heard how Krishna's birth happened in a prison, and when Lord Narayan gave darshan and he entered her womb and she felt a light entering her. We know about Lord Rama, and we'll explore that part tonight more and more, that how the birth of Ram happened with a havan, with a homam, by the queens partaking a paisam, a sweet curd, sweet rice pudding. So we realize that there is an element of mystery behind the birth of divine and divine beings. That they choose to enter a womb, they choose to manifest. There is a choice in this agreement, that they choose who should be their parent. They choose what should be the environment which they want to come in. So whenever we talk about pravesha, which is an entry, literal translation of pravesha is entry. When they choose to enter this world through a womb or through manifestation of a body or a form, they choose where, who, when, and all that. But in prasava concept, the soul does not have apparent choice who he wants as a parent. Soul does not choose which home he should come. Soul does not choose how he should be born. Well, then there is a correlation of, what should I say, karmic obligations, which can be, which can help in compiling and understanding to a great extent as to how a soul gets that kind of a body, that kind of family, that kind of parents. Well, that can be correlated through the law of karma to a great extent. But the choice is not with the soul, with that independent individual soul to decide. And hence we term that as prasava. So prasava literally means conception, where a child is conceived in a mother's womb because of marriage relationship. So the prasava is a concept where a soul, if I look at it from a spiritual eye, from an adhyatmic vision, I would say pravesha is where the will of the soul is prominent, where the soul decides where to enter, where not to enter, and all that. And in pravesha, in prasava, there is no control in the hand of the soul. So in prasava, we are all beings fall in the most category. But then we found a new flavor, and that flavor, I am very happy to confess that it came only because of Bhagwan. And we have seen these examples, even though we have seen the examples from time immemorial. Okay? And what is that? That there is a combination of a will of God and a human effort. So it, in a way, if you can say that there is a certain area of pravesha where the will of God is prominent, but it is camouflaged by the human effort of prasava. And what do I mean by that? Is there many occasions when you would have experienced, and people who have not even come to Bhagwan Baba, I'm sure if India is full of saints and seers. So I feel confident that you might have met or interacted with saints who just bless you and say, "Okay, my child, eat this apple, and you will have a child." Like Bhagwan would very casually remark and say, "Okay, married, Saubhagyavati Bhava, next year come with a baby, come with a boy." In fact, he would announce sometimes. And he didn't give any paisam or any apple or fruit to eat, but the person would have a baby. And there are occasions when people have not conceived for 10, 15 years, and Bhagwan just makes a statement and they have a baby. So you wonder, and you can witness these examples. You can see such examples from many places. You don't need Bhagwan Baba's experience alone for this illustration. So what we realize is that there is an area wherein pravesha happens because of the divine will, camouflaged by human effort. So we have another false sense, which we can call it as a maya, that okay, this child is mine. But in fact, God planted the child in you. The God planted the child in these places, and there are many such people who are who can be found. They have born not just because some two people came together and got married. There are many, many people who have been blessed to be born through the word of God, or through an act of God. And when I say the word of God, I do not mean only Bhagwan Baba. There are many. I'm sure if I, I will scratch all of you here and people who listen to us, you can get innumerable examples where people have been blessed with babies just because their guru or somebody blessed them. So, what do I call that? Because that is, of course, prasava from an external view, from all the logical perspective. But why did it happen only when a divine master did something? And that is a very mystical way of understanding that there is a huge element which makes us realize that even prasava, even the prasava, the conception part of it, has a huge element of divine will. And once we start looking through the Sukshma Buddhi little deeply, we will realize that majority of the game of the cosmos is Pravesha, where the divine chooses to act. So most of us, if you look at our lives, you will experience that there is a lot of element, and you can see how Bhagwan has touched and blessed so many people. So we could also be a squirrel who have been blessed to take birth at this appropriate time. So when Bhagwan says, I have chosen you to come and be born in the time when Avatar decided to come, how can I be part of Prasava experience alone? If I am blessed to experience the divine, which is such a rare phenomena, then how can I be merely an ordinary element of creation happening through a default karmic effect of prasava? When Bhagwan stood up and said on his 60th birthday, it was in Hillview Stadium, and everybody was standing there, and function was going on, And Bhagwan casually made a remark. He said, "This is the same gathering which was when Rama got coronated. So if Avatar has willed that the same congregation which was present, of course, not in this same physical body, but if the same spirit combination was there when Rama's coronation was happening, then it cannot be an act of mere prasava, a human interaction or a default function for all of us to be born at the time when Avatar took birth in Kali Yuga. So, in a way, we are all part of this experience of Pravesha. So, Pravesha becomes a very beautiful, phenomenal concept wherein we explore and to understand how the divine will overtakes the human effort. And to an extent, we realize that human effort is just a futile activity, a futile fantasy in a way. But this journey to realize is the whole game of life. So let me welcome my brother. He was a little delayed, but I'm happy to bring him on and we can continue our discussion with brother Ranganath Raju. Sai Ram Raju,
Sai Ram, brother, Sai Ram. I'm sorry I got delayed because of some issue with the
no
power
problem.
here.
I was just sharing this thought of just Prasava and Pravesha,
Yes, brother.
just to give an intro about how the divine, when they come, they choose their own whole drama contingent. They choose their army, and we somehow default version have an element of pravesha with ourselves. It could be we might not have eaten a paisam,
Yeah,
rice pudding from a fire, but or not had an apple from Swami's hand, but there was a divine will which coincided for all of us to manifest at the beautiful time of creation when Avatar himself manifested. What would you
yes,
say
brother.
about that, Ranga?
Yes, brother. In fact, I was also thinking to understand Prasava and Pravesha, the critical difference between these two. To go back to the scene where Yagnavalkya enters the court of Janaka, and there was an argument between Yagnavalkya and the nine scholars of Janaka's court. So, yeah, it went on many subjects, but one of the important questions which was raised by Bandi was this. He says that Yagnavalkya, you claim to be knowledge. Now, look at all those people who are in this court. Some are tall, some are short, some are fair, some are dark, some are educated, some are uneducated, some are poor, some are rich. What is it that makes these differences? I mean, what is it that actually made all these differences? To which Yagnavalkya beautifully answers. He says, the reason for someone being fat, someone being short, someone being tall, someone being lean, or someone fair, the difference in the appearance of the body is because of your karma. And he says that the thoughts that you have thought, the thoughts of your previous life, manifest into a human body in the next life. The way you look at things, the way you perceive things, that end up being your physical body in the next life, and the thoughts in this current life make your physical body in the next life. So essentially, what Yagnavalkya is saying is, uh, our human bodies are made by our karmic effort of previous lives. Now we take it from there and string it to the conversation that Swami said. One of the boys said, Swami, one of my classmates said, Swami, my left eye, I'm not able to see it. It's not clearly visible. Swami said, Prarabdham Ra. Prarabdham is nothing but
Really?
it's a, yeah, he said
That's
Prarabdham Ra, but later Swami rubbed his eye, it became all right. Now Swami created a vibhuti and rubbed it on his eye, and he said 11 days apply this vibhuti, and it became all right. But the point that Swami made, that comment, that prarabdhamra, which means that this physical body of his was manifested by the thoughts of his earlier life. Now And another comment that Swami made, sorry, I should have actually mentioned, when Swami said Prarabdhamra, he showed himself, it said, no defect, all perfect. So, which means that the physical body that the Lord has taken up is actually by the pure will of the Lord. Every anga, that's why it's called Shubhanga, every anga, every organ of his body is his own will. There is no karma that is actually weaving this physical element of the body. Now, that's how the pravesha becomes very different from prasava. Prasava is your karmic effect is giving you this body. Now, another point that Swami beautifully emphasized to one of our professors is, out of sheer grace, the karmic consequences can be rearranged by the divine. So essentially, if we want some people, some elements, some lives to come together with his physical form, some of those karmic elements are rearranged in such a way that, yeah, these physical bodies with these mental properties manifest, and they move around with the avatar to attain the objectives of the avatar. So that's how many of the people around avatar also kind of, as you're mentioning, have the elements of prasava and also pravesha.
It's beautiful. So we were now, if you look at it, Raju, from Ram's perspective, from Sri Ram's perspective, and Bhagwan Baba, both have this element. Obviously, they chose who to be born to, who should be their parents, and basically we know the story of Bhagwan Baba also. And in fact, I'm sure you can share that how he asked Mother Ishwaramba to confirm that Prasava point. And in last few episodes, I had even mentioned the place, which is
Yes.
Karnataka Nagapalli, right across Chitravati River, a place where Mother Ishwarma was, and there she conceived, and the well is now being maintained there, so people can obviously go and have a look at that. So that was that storyline. We all know how he entered, and we have heard about Krishna. Same thing happened, and obviously Rama will explore it further. So Raju, I wanted to bring in another facet, another element of the birth, the lessons we learn from the birth part, and that is an element of, in today's parlance we call them aliens. Okay, but when we study the scriptures and we look at it and the way Bhagwan explains about devatas, they don't seem to be too far off from us. So basically, they are the high frequency beings who have the sattva element much stronger. They are called devatas. Unfortunately, the English language, everything gets translated into gods and god and gods, and hence there is confusion about. So we have a god of this, god of that, god of that. In fact, but in our Vedantic parlance, when we speak about it, we call them devatas.
Yes,
So
brother.
they are devas because they control an spiritual element. So could you please explain that part just to clarify how we understand what devata means?
Yes, brother. And again, Chandagya Upanishad very clearly gives this definition of Asura, Manava, and Deva, where Prajapati explains to Indra and the king of Asuras that who is an asura? Asura is the one who emphasizes the importance of body over anything else. He is the one who is drawn by his senses, and who is drawn by the vagaries of the mind is to an extent asura. Now Manava is one who is affected by the mind, vagaries of mind, but yet he has some bit of control, and he also importantly has the element of daya, compassion. And Deva is the one who is able to differentiate between action of mind, action of senses, and the intellect. Who he is able to draw his intellect as a charioteer for his senses, and he goes on to explain that that is how you become devata, and that is where dana, the importance of giving charity, as you had beautifully explained in earlier sessions, where the act of charity is is becoming a second nature of the being. Because they are endowed with so much compassion, daya, that you want to give something to others. So that's how our mythology looks at uh, the Danava, Manava, and Deva. It is not that they are some are names, some are as unfortunately our the English tradition brings it that some are names, some are uh, celestial beings. It is not the case. I mean, even if you look at, for example, the conversation that happened between Dasharatha and Indra, or between Hanuman and uh, Brahma, or even to an extent Ravana and the nine Navagrahas. There is no sense of awe. The way in which Valmiki writes is it's just like a normal conversation. And Narada enters. It is not that our man Ravana was awed by Narada's sudden appearance. He just, as a matter of fact, he asks, "So, how was your trip to Swarga? How was it?" He says, "It's all good." And then conversation goes on. Even the same is the fact when Vasishtha comes to Dashratha, that is where he begins his royal briefing, saying that no, I have been here and here, and this is how Devendra is ruling his kingdom. And then, as a matter of fact, as he's inquiring the royal strategies, he just asks Vasishtha as to how so and so is doing, and how is the water level, how is everybody happy in Swarga. It is just a normal matter of inquiry. There is no awe. And I think that is what even our Ramayana brings forth to us, that the coexistence that we had mentioned first in our first episode, that the coexistence of animals, humans, and supposedly these beings who have placed their intellect as a charioteer of their life, who are able to discriminate between good and bad, between right and wrong. And that's how those devas were part of the same ecosystem, and they were the forefront of forerunners of bringing the avatar into a human form.
I'm just reminded a little deviation. I'm reminded of a story, and I would love to share that. When Samudra Manthan happens, the churning of the ocean, and one of the items which came out of that was sur, that is supposedly translated as wine. So when the liquor came out, the wine came out, it seems, as per Bhagwan's description very sweetly, that the Danavas did not rush towards it because they were told by their guru that we have to aim for Amrit. So Danavas were so focused for Amrit, they didn't care for anything else. That is why you see that most of the things got into shared by Devatas. Because Devatas were balanced, as you're saying, could be, and they were taking everything, whatever came out, with respect. But Danavas were not interested in anything. They were literally focused on Amrit, and they were, whatever was given to them, trusted they will take it. So it seemed when this sur wine came out, they didn't take it. And Devatas said, okay, we'll have it. So Devatas were given. So because Devatas had taken the sur, they are called sur, and the Danavas refused the sur, so they were called asur. So
Yeah.
when I read this, I was laughing. I said, "Oh God!" So asur has a better connotation. So
Yeah.
asurs are so focused that they defied themselves from the vagary of a vine, and they let it go. So they were called asur because they left asura. They did not go for sur. So that is the reason for asur. So imagine a danava is an asur, which is a better thing in a way, if you look at it from that logic. So it's very funny that how it gets distorted as we go forward, and the word has a negative connotation today. So imagine you
Yes.
calling somebody and saying you are an asur. So they would say, "Yeah, what are you talking to me? I'm not demon." But here the asur means one who has defied himself from any intoxication. So imagine he's a good person. So you don't have to be Dana, but you can be Asur. But it's a very beautiful, when I look at these things, how the corruption happens, I think that would give a glimpse to all of us that how Devatas are got into a bracket. And probably that is the reason why anytime the movies show us Indra's court, they only show us with dancing girls and with people drinking wines. Because they can't conceive a spiritual environment wherein the person has a caliber to hold everything under his senses. So they have to depict it as more, you know, gratifying sensual gratification rather than control of senses. So, anyways, so this was the I think you've given a very beautiful idea about devatas. I would like you to look at and share your thoughts on the, what should I say, the combination, the collaboration of devatas and manav, which also happens to be like as per the things, and reason for yuga change or an help assistance in yuga change. But as you are mentioning that at time immemorial from beginning there was a collaboration. Maybe in Satyug it was not so distinct, it was very clear. So they were freely moving, as you said, there was no awe factor, there was nothing different. In Rama's period, say in Treta Yuga, it was similar. They were in a different plane, you were in different plane, and they communicated and they collaborated. In fact, we have enough stories where Dashrath has gone with his army and fought for, like a UN forces. So he fought for the whole world and the whole cosmos. It's like I'm fighting for that. But as we came down to Dwapar, there was the element, the data started becoming little difficult for a common man to see. So that's why the appearances were made by devatas. Everybody was not probably in the same frequency of life to have lived together. And in Kali Yuga, the devatas are almost hidden factor. So we call them aliens. What do you think, Raju? Give me your
Yes, brother.
thoughts.
Yes, in fact, absolutely. In fact, there is a beautiful mention in one of the Telugu Ramayanas where Narada is extolling Indra. He tells Indra that in the Kruta Yuga you had taken arms, ammunition, and firepower for restoring dharma. In Treta, you have befriended humans for establishing dharma. In Dwapara, you assume the forms of humans to establish dharma, and in Kali Yuga, you have become the thoughts of humans. You have reached to a subtle stage of being the thoughts of humans to be the mediums for establishing dharma. So he kind of gives the progression as to how that element of supposedly devatas has actually percolated into human existence. And looking at this definition, if if we look at, for example, the way in which Ramayana takes place, so that is where humans are beginning to very closely interact with this supposedly different mindset of people, devatas, who have high amount of sattva guna, who were very compassionate, who had complete control over senses, and they were in fact playing the part of guru, of being a guru for the human evolution. If we Brother, also if you look at, for example, the way in which uh, Indra sends down the chariot to Ramachandra, the war is happening, and
War of war, at time of
yes,
war, yes.
and
Mm.
Ravana is on a chariot, and everybody suggests to Indra that Rama can't be standing on ground, so send him the chariot. So what I was actually amused and in fact pleasantly surprised was the way in which Swami describes in the discourse. He says tala 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 digutu undadu. He says it was shimmering and it is coming down. And everybody just, the way in which Swami describes is like Rama just looks at it and continues to fight. Imagine of something of that same thing would have happened in the current times. Something is descending from skies, probably hundreds and thousands would throng to look at the descending object. But it was just a matter of fact that yeah, something is coming down, and Lakshmana inquires as to what is it. And Hanuman says it is the chariot for Rama. So everybody agrees, and then Rama gets onto the chariot. It is, even Rama does not even acknowledge the beauty of the chariot. He just gets onto it and continues the fight. So uh, it is. I think Swami is very subtly indicating that that these appearances were not of concern. In fact, one of my classmates had asked one Swami that Swami, uh, is it true that the humans were like 18 feet in Krita and they became 12 to 13 feet in Treta? So he immediately retorted saying, "What difference does it make to you? 18 feet unte what does it make difference to you if they are 18 or 13 or 6 or 3?" All of us are shocked. Without Swami appeared to be in good mood, and this brother who had no answer just kept looking at Swami. Swami said, "That is not what is important. These bodies will keep changing, but the value system, but the values which with which they lived, that is what you should learn. That those things would not change." And I think that is what we should be looking at. If we look at the way in which Rama Avatar was brought in, or Pravesha or Prasava, that value system that embedded all these beings together, that continues to be same irrespective of how uh, the thought processes change, how those elements of interactions of these beings change. I think, don't you agree with it, that thread of values, the thread of love
Certainly,
between God and divine, God and man.
certainly, I will totally agree. Certainly, if you look at it, all uh, these information, what the height of people at that time and how they interacted and all. See, these are good to know facts, and they create a little bit of kind of suspense and interest in people. But they are not that important unless and until we understand the Atma part of it, that hidden message. And that is probably why Bhagwan, even though he gave us a detailed Ramayana, in fact, you all had the blessed opportunity of doing plays of that era when Bhagwan would guide you as to tell, hey, Rama stood like this, he
Yes.
wore like this, Krishna's crown was like this. So he was so particular about small details. But did that really make it much different in the human evolution? But it mattered for that person interaction, it was nice. But what he's more concerned was the messaging of the play. So even though he focused on your dress, that even the pleats were right or not, even the Dashavatar looked nice. So there are so many factors that Swami was so particularly watching. But overall, when he looks at it, he would always look at the message of it. Did you really relate to it? Did you learn from it? Something like that. So I would 100% agree that even though we are sharing this information, what we have got, blessed to hear and listen or find from Bhagwan and other sources, it's good to know. But ultimately, what is important is the message of an avatar and his life. So when we are talking about this, I recall one day Bhagwan even said, there's some occasion about, somebody is talking about this climate change and all that. I know some reasoning, some discussion, and Bhagwan said, humans have to learn to work with devatas. He used the word
Wow.
devata. He said humans and devatas must learn to coexist. They have to collaborate. It was very strange for me to hear that statement. That time I could not speak to him. I couldn't ask. I was maybe a very small guy in the whole meeting group. But the feeling comes that collaboration, like you're talking like as if we are on the same table. Devata sitting on the side and humans sitting on this side and saying you have to collaborate and work together. And probably later on, I got to hear from others that when you're talking about how an homum's happening in Parthi, and people were relating like Bhagwan is promoting Vedic culture of that he does that. But the scientific reason of homum, the scientific reason of invoking divine, the scientific reason of collaboration with the nature, I think that is the secret which we all have to accept. If not today, tomorrow we have to accept it. What do you
Yes,
think?
brother. Yes, brother. In fact, if you look at, for example, Swami very clearly emphasizes the process of yagna itself. I mean, there was one occasion, I think, in Rajmandri where, according to the scriptures, that if the yagna is performed in such and such manner, there would be a downpour of rain, massive rain. Now, as it goes, when Swami was on the tour, it was the year of a severe drought. Entire India was, especially the states of Andhra, Telangana, were experiencing drought, and this yagna was conceived mm, as a propitiating act of prayer to Varuna. Now, Swami was about to perform, and some newspapers had carried a mocking statement saying that uh, uh, what IMD cannot predict, some yogi, some Baba seems to uh, predict. Let's see
Predict
what
the
happens.
rain.
And it was in fact Swami. It was communicated to Swami also. Swami, as what I heard, Swami just brushed it aside, and the yajna was done. As soon as the yajna, the purna ahuti of that yajna was done and the prasadam was distributed, there was such a downpour of rain that residents had not seen in many years, probably in decades. Such heavy downpour, everybody was shocked. And that is when Swami makes a comment saying that when the yajna is done by rishis itself, the phalam is obtained. But now, when it is done by yajna purusha himself, would not the rains come down? And I think Swami, apart from making the point that he is Yajna Purusha, is also very clearly had 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 done it to demonstrate that is actually there is a scientific reason and a process for the entire ecosystem of human and nature. And Yajna appears to be the medium of that connection. I mean, when the Yajna Purusha, when that divine being came out from fire in Yajna, it very clearly Swami in Ramakatha Rasamayana is there, and also many discourses. Again, there is no sense of awe. It is only the Dasharatha bows, everybody gets up and bow. And Swami describes, yes, there is that person was shine. I mean, he was bright, he was effulgent, he was very overpowering in his appearance, but there is no sense of awe. Like that everybody was stunned into silence. It was not the case. Everybody get up and they both they know that yeah, it is the yajna was performed well. It has reached its culmination and this entity has come out. All of them get up and bow, and then the patra is given, which means it's a scientific. It appears like it's a scientific process of probably connecting two entities, which is one entity is visible to naked eye, another is not visible to naked eye, but that yajnam is a method of manifesting that unseen object into a seen form. Appears like.
In fact, we all have seen, especially in Puttaparthi, whenever we have Dashera Homam, I don't think any Dashera Homam must have concluded without rains.
Yes, absolutely.
Every time the Homam would close on the last day, we will have a torrential rains. And it's so funny that it'll rain only on that spot, finish that day and finish. But it would rain. And it was a common thing. We all just took it for we took it for granted that it will rain. That's all it is. Okay, let us take it from there, Raju, and let's move forward. That when Dashratha was depressed in a way, that not having a progeny and lineage, and was worried about it, he consults his guru, Acharya Vashisht, Bhagwan Vashisht, and he prays to him that please guide. I don't know what curse is on me and all that. And Vashisht also as Bhagwan explains, in a very divine mood, he closes his eyes, meditates, and he says, yes, Dashrath, you will have a son, you will have child. And for that, you have to do what he called as a big yajnam, and we look at that too. But Raju, very interesting thing was that you have a Saptarishi, here you have a Rishi Vashisht, uh, and others, not one. They were like the galaxy of rishis that time,
Galaxy of
who were Manas Putras of Brahma himself, highest caliber. But in that crowd, Vashisht he names sage Rishishringa. He says, Dashrath, You have to invite him, Rishi Sage Rishishringa, to perform this yagna. Only he is capable, who is capable of it. And it is a very intriguing thing. When I was initially thinking about it, Raju, it was really awesome that of such caliber of people you have it, and then you invite somebody else, and he is much younger to them. If you look at from age wise, from
Absolutely.
experience wise, Rishi Sringa was much junior in that category, if I may put it that way. But yet, he was given the most crucial, critical, and important task, which was the cause or became the conduit for an avatar to descend. Can you imagine what an important task a role has to be played by somebody, and it is not played by Manasputra of Brahma. It is played
Absolutely.
by a small young man called Rishi Shringa. So, Raju, I would
Yes, brother.
like you to tell us the story
Yes.
of this Rishi. Who was this? What is this phenomena? Whom even the Saptarishi bow down and said, "Call him."
Yeah, so Rishishringa happens to be the son of sage Vibandaka. Vibandaka was, in fact, running an experiment in some sense that he wanted to bring up his child pure and unsullied. He did not want his child to be corrupted by the ways of the world. So Vibandaka withdraws himself completely after he gets this child, and this child has not seen the world apart from his father. And this father is known for his severe penance, strict physical discipline. So all that this kid Rishashinga knows is that severe physical, spiritual discipline. His entire day would be filled with meditation and prayer, and it continues to such an extent that the a, a, a kingdom nearby goes into complete drought, and this king goes begging to sage after sage, and that is when Narada advises that it is only a soul who is pure in his thought, word, and deed. When he sets his foot in that kingdom, it would rain. So then Romapada, the king was Romapada. He asked as to who is that great one who can alleviate the curse of this kingdom. And Narada advises that it is this kid who is actually growing up in the care of Vibandaka, and Vibandaka would not let this kid to be corrupted by the world. So you have to ensure that you trick Vibandaka and get this kid to the kingdom. So the story goes that he sends damsels, and for that it is for the first time that Rishasringa is seeing a form of a
Another
woman,
human being, and that to a
another human
lady.
being, yeah, and that to a lady. And there are very innocent question that Rishasringa asks about the appearance of women, and then slowly Rishasringa is drawn as a playmate uh, into the kingdom, and but Vibandaka kind of first he refuses, and then they trick Vibandaka, and Rishasingha is brought to the kingdom, and it begins to rain. Romapada was so relieved, was so grateful that he praised to Vibandaka that such a great sage should actually have a progeny that should bless this humanity, and that's how he gives his daughter in marriage, saying that Rishashinga, you create people of your caliber, because it's not one Rishashinga is not enough. There should be many more Rishashingas. And yes, there are different stories about this lady Shanta, the daughter of Ramapada. And Mahabharata, there's a mention of she being Dashratha's daughter, and in some places it is contested. But however, the point is that this is the story of Rishashinga. That this was the person who was pure, up pure in the sense unsullied. He was not corrupted by the ways of the world till he achieved his goal of meditation. And
One thing I think we should highlight that Rishinga was a child of a rishi and an
yes,
apsara.
Apsara, yeah,
So both are very, very high. So Rishi has a caliber, and that Dhrupada Rishi was not an ordinary Rishi. He was a very high caliber Rishi who could have married a damsel, an Apsara. And Apsaras unfortunately, the connotation in which we have been presented apsaras as a dancing girls is not right. Absolutely not right. They are highly charged divine beings. Of course, they have the caliber to create, attract anybody. They have a supreme power of it, and that is how they get used for lot of work which devatas wanted to be done, but they are not the people of sensual gratification as we have been presented. So a damsel of that high caliber and a rishi father, rishi who was of that similar spiritual, much higher spiritual caliber, from that this child Rishishringa was born. And then father, as you mentioned, then the father's penance to keep the child totally secluded, protected, and to grow up. And then our king, he was actually a friend of Dasharatha, as we have mentioned, who, as many stories would tell, that he adopted Shanta as his daughter. And but Bhagwan has not mentioned, so we can't authenticate as to whether Dashratha had any daughter. But we know that Rompada, who was the king of Angadesh, he had adopted a girl called Shanta, and she, as Brother Raju mentioned, and he, in gratitude, when he saw the power and the grace which he bestowed Rishishringa on his state with rain and prosperity, he gave his daughter in marriage to him. So that is what we have heard so far. So which is very interesting how Rishishringa, such a pure. But Raju, let's go into that now. Such a pure being. Now, why do you think he was selected? You know, and what is the speciality that brought him there? How would you explain that part? How would you look at that?
Yes, yeah, very. I think it is all. It's a lesson for all of us to ponder. Like when the Ananta Padmanabha Swami's temple treasures were discovered, out of the five doors, four cells were opened, and the fifth one is still locked. And they say it is locked by the Garuda Bandhan, and only one who is of extreme purity can unlock that bandhan, that knot, the divine knot, and it cannot be undone by anyone else. So, why this is significant is if you look at the curse that actually befallen on Dasharatha. Our man Ravana gets worried that Dasharatha will have progeny, and Kausalya is already predicted to be the bearer of the son who will kill Ravana, and he had already tasted the power of Dasharatha earlier. So Ravana goes and begs Brahma that this man Dasharatha should not have an progeny. So he is, in fact, the fertility of Dashratha is kind of bound by that curse. That it is that nobody, it is not possible for a human with a bit of impurity to unlock that curse. So now, if we look at, so there is a very beautiful explanation given by uh, one of the speakers. He says this is about progeny. This is about creating life, and only those. If you look at why was Rishishringa selected, only that being who used his semen with purpose and with full control, only he has that purity and that ability to unlock that curse. And if now with if this becomes the yardstick of the selection, nobody in that crowd of Dashrata had this. I mean, yeah, probably they have achieved it, but earlier to that they were not in control of their semen. So even to an extent, Vasishta in the earlier stages of his life, he had 100 sons and all of them were killed, but it's sheer tapas that made Vasishta, not by birth that anyone was endowed with that supreme ability. It was only Rishishringa. It is because he was under the tutelage of his great father. and that's how Rishishringa gets selected. It is essentially it is that purity of thought, purity of word, and purity of deed of Rishishringa. He becomes an instrument for selection.
Raju, I can't help but remind you, we're talking about how Bhagwan
Yes,
had insulated his students. If you look
absolutely.
at it that way, and it's a very strange thought, but it's a very powerful thought. And many people, in fact, criticized Bhagwan that some of you are protecting your children too much. How will they face the world? And and Bhagwan used to give that analogy of a small sapling. He says when it is a small sapling and growing into a tree, you need all the cover, boundary, and everything. But once it becomes a full-fledged tree, it will only give shelter. And even if you throw a stone at it, it will give you fruit in return. So that was the analogy of Bhagwan. But now, when you tell me about Rishishringa, I am forced to think that can there be a beautiful correlation of what Bhagwan was actually visualizing for all his children?
Absolutely, brother. I think, yeah, it's a beautiful point that you made. That I think what Swami is very subtly showing us is the way to create more Rishashingas. And Rishashinga, by name, he is an entity who brought down divine, who manifested divine into human form. Essentially, he is creating all those beings who have that capacity, if treated well, to manifest the divinity in their lives amidst the lives of society. Probably in some sense Swami is looking at creating Rishashingas, and Swami is very particular. I think now it becomes very clear if you look at Rishashinga's life. In fact, there is a heated argument between Vibhandaka and King Romapada in the first instance when he comes requesting. He comes actually requesting Vibhandaka, saying that please send your son. He says, my son will not step out of this ashram. And Ramapada says, I will give him gold, I will give him this facility, I will send him chariots, I will do this. It is very similar. I remember talking to Muni auntie or talking to our principal, talking to Muni auntie especially, where people have come and said, we will install ACs, we will install hot water. And she would not get permission from Swami. Swami would say no. And in fact, school at a point when one fan came up in hostel room per room, Swami, apparently Swami was so shocked that one fan per room. It's like there are hostels which have ACs per student, but Swami was apparently so surprised that there are one fan per room. I can never forget the expression on Swami's face. Okka fana, okka room ki. Like he was apparently so shocked because the standard that Swami is expecting are like the standards of Rishashinga.
In our time, I remember later on it got diluted. Newspapers were not allowed. I should say, even newspapers were not allowed. Everything was, and you literally went. You were in Perthi as a student, literally only for Swami. Everything else was secondary, and he was so proud of that. In fact, I'll tell you a small incident which happened in the Perthi in the Darshan time. I believe it was some chief minister or some senior minister of Assam who had visited Perthi. I'm sure it was either Thursday or Sunday because that is the day when primary school kids would come to darshan, and they were sitting right across us, in front of us. Uh, and Bhagwan, he loves, as a proud mother, he loves to show off his children. So when that minister was sitting there and Bhagwan was talking to us, he was showing, talking to and praising us and all that, and these kids came, and in that group there was one boy from Assam. So Bhagwan probably wanted to show off that, look, I have a child from Assam also, and you are a chief minister there or minister, and here is my child. So he made him get up and he asked, Bhagwan said, where are you from? And the typical answer of our primary school children were, Swami, from you. So that was how they were trained. And today you realize the importance of that answer, that I am from you, God. And Swami said, yes, yes, that is me. But physically, where you come from? So Swami insisted that he should spell out the name of the place. He said, physically, where are you from? That's why Bhagwan had to change his sentence. for that boy to give answer. And the boy very cutely said, Bhagwan from Assam. And Swami looked at the chief minister and says, you know, Assami boy, Assam boy. And that minister also had stood up and he was looking at the child and Swami's conversation. And Bhagwan asked him, boy, do you know who's the chief minister of Assam? No, this boy very innocently said, no, Swami, I don't know. Usually you would expect that the child should say the answer and Swami will say, look, my children know it. So there is a kind of an anti-climax. And the child said, Swami, I don't know. And Bhagwan immediately in a very serious mode, he said, why? Should you not know? He said, no, Swami, I'm here for you. I know you, that's enough.
Wow.
That was a
Wow.
5 year, fifth class or something whether a child. Can you imagine an immediate response from the child was, Swami, I don't need to know. I know you and that's enough for me. You can't imagine, Raju, at that moment, you could see the sparkling eye of Swami. How when he gets excited and happy, you can all recall the face of Bhagwan, that shining eyes, and he literally jumped towards the child and he pulled him and he gave him a hug. He literally hugged the child. It was a brilliant answer, and I think because it came out spontaneously from the child, it was fantastic. But it made the sense, right? Now, if you look at this Rishishringa story, and now we can realize that what kind of children Bhagwan was building up. When we were externally coming, we already had our influences. We could be like
Absolutely.
Vashishta, who had already gone through the turmoil of life. But here he was bringing Rishishringas in primary, where from an age of 3, the child was protected by God Himself, totally cared. They could not look here and there, and they didn't care to look here and there. A child of 5th class could say boldly to Bhagwan, I don't need to know who is the chief minister. I know you, that's enough. Can you imagine
Absolutely.
the confidence? So when you were telling that, probably I would say he intended, and I'm sure he must have created in some magnitude variety of Rishishringas which we don't know.
Absolutely. My son, he is in right now in seventh class at primary school, so he just joined after vacation. As you are aware, my father had passed away recently, and we were doing the rites, those 12-day rites. On the 12th day, our tradition, uh, there are like 14 to 18 priests come and we give dana to each one. So one particular dana, and it's an elaborate process, and like hymns after hymns are being chanted, and then we do Pada Namaskar. So I, as the eldest son, because I had lit my father's fire, so I give this dana. My son was observing all this. So the head priest of all these 18 priests, he was telling, now this priest comes to you in the form of Yama. So please give him this. So he chants that mantra, and then I give him that. We gave that dana, then I do namaskar. It goes on. Now it went on, and after 15th or 16th, in the middle of that arrangement, one of my aunties, she was arranging, and she unintentionally she ended up being in the line in that queue, because it's an elaborate thing and there are a lot of process going on. I did not actually check as to who is standing in the line, so I just took this lady's namaskar without realizing. And suddenly the head priest who was sitting there at the end, he shouted, saying, "Yeah, no, you cannot touch that lady." Like he kind of gave an expression saying, that, "Oh, you have done something wrong." That kind of expression. This boy of sixth class, so he just looked at him very innocently. He was sitting right behind him. He was observing the entire process. He asked him, Guru, like, Master, haven't you chanted few minutes before this Purusha Suktam? He says, yes. He says, yeah, Purusha Suktam I have chanted. And he says, does not the Purusha Suktam say that from the form of Purusha, uh, every part, one being comes out, and Purusha himself becomes so many people? This is a sixth class boy asking, and that man was stunned. He was just looking at him. He says, so what are you coming to? He says, if everybody is Purusha, if everybody is that Swami, why should not my father touch the lady's feet? Why is it that only this person is special? I I was stunned with the way this boy got to that. Yes, yeah, he happens to be my son, but the teaching that was given to him, the training, I was stunned. In fact, the entire crowd, the 18 of those priests were gaping and looking at him and saying, "Where do you study? Who taught you all this?" And the argument was joined even by his cousin, my brother's sister, my brother's daughter.
Oh,
He says,
oh,
"Yes, yes,"
Saira.
and he started chanting the Puja Suktam. So these are the kind of kids that this is just a sample. These are the kind of kids that Swami is bringing up. I'm sure.
Amazing.
I'm sure many
Amazing.
more.
Amazing.
Yes,
You
brother.
know,
In
only
fact,
a Swami's child, only Bhagwan's child can speak like that. Their whole vision, their whole outlook changes.
yes,
And mine, I think I would like the audience to, viewers to note one thing, that Bhagwan's children are not necessarily to be when he was physically available. The divine aura continues. So a child who is there today also has the similar grace and blessing as it was ever for anybody. So I think Raju, thanks for sharing this beautiful story because it really brings the message home clearly. Beautiful. Okay, let's go into our next section, which is to talk about how Shinga organized this, what we call the Putra Kamekshi Yajna. And what is this, if you can tell? How did he organize? There was a, and I think when you look at this protocol of organizing this Havan, uh, I can't help but compare it with Bhagwan, how meticulous he was in organizing every event. In fact, a small dining hall session was organized by Bhagwan with such a meticulous manner, which nobody would even imagine there will be a problem of who will sit where. See, in a normal traditional way, you would say just pick up the plate and go and sit anywhere you are comfortable with. But Bhagwan's caliber was that no, it has to be followed. A protocol needs to be followed everywhere. And we all know how, if the guests were invited, then obviously, suppose most of the time, if it's a formal function in the hostel, vice chancellor would accompany Bhagwan, then our registrar would accompany, controller of examination, our professors, deans, and teachers, all will be invited formally. At that time, you have to watch how, with Bhagwan, all of them would sit in particular order. The vice chancellor being on the head of the table, like he will be sitting, and then the controller, registrar, and all the deans and professors will go in order. You cannot change the order where the person has to sit. And when the dinner is finished, then they will get up together. So there is a lot of protocol which happens. And sometimes you wonder, like, when Bhagwan is there, why do we need that? But it is so beautiful to watch how Bhagwan has promoted all of that. He has given this whole understanding of the importance which we have to give. And here we have Rishishringa, who is now given the authority to organize this yajna. And
yes,
he is
brother.
titled as Brahman, right? So please,
Yes,
all
yes, brother. In
yours. Go
fact,
for it.
uh, uh, just to draw a parallel, Swami beautifully explains as to how the yajna was organized and the protocol in which, when one sage was brought in, it was Vasishta who goes and invites, and when another sage comes in, it is Dasharatha who goes and invites, and when someone else comes in, it is Sumantra who goes and invites. It is very clear protocol that someone gets welcomed by certain level. So it is one priest at a time, the minister at a time. When the guest is of certain caliber, it is the king himself, and the order in which they were made to sit, the cloth which was distributed to one after another, the color of the cloth, and the timing of the cloth. I'm kind of forced to draw a parallel of our Lord 1962 when Swami performed the first Sapta Jnana Yajnam. It was presided as Brahma, just as Rishishringa was the presiding priest for this yagna of Prutakameshti, who is called the Brahma. Ganapati Shastri was the presiding priest or the Brahma for the first yajna in Puttaparthi. Now, mind you, this Ganapati, Pular Ganapati Shastri came to Swami because he was pressurized in some sense by the king of uh, near Nellore, our Venka. Sorry, I'm not getting the name. Our Venkata, the king near Nellore, who was giving darshan as Rama by Swami.
Oh, this Venkatgiri.
Venkatagiri, so yeah, Venkatagiri, yes. So Venkatagiri kings pressurized him, kind of exerted a soft influence on them. So this Shastri, Ganapati Shastri, Pular Ganapati Shastri kind of came in, and the next day there's a beautiful talk given by Shastri Garu, where he is floored. He says, why? Because he kind of becomes a devotee of Swami. He says, what is the reason? He says, I have only read in scriptures the way in which these yajnas are performed. I have done, by then he had done something like 500 or odd yajnas. I have done so many yajnas in best of the places, but nowhere did I find such strict compliance to the injunctions of of the Vedic measures. It is only God, it is only Brahman who can do this. And he says, the color of the cloth matches exactly to what it was mentioned in our scriptures. The order in which the cloth was distributed by Swami also matches. The order in which the priests were seated or also matches. Everything matched to the dot of it. And he says, if it is there is someone who can do this, it's only the personification of Sanatana Dharma. He says it is the Dharma Murti alone can do this. And he kind of prostrates to Swami that Swami, I am floored by uh, your complaints to the Sanatana Dharma, which is not possible to a human. You must be divine, and hence you are able to do. And it is this Swami, this Lord.
Is it the same person who used to do Surya Namaskar to Swami?
Yes, yeah, yeah. Later, yes, yes.
I
So
mean, Yagnam time,
yes.
every day he'll do 108 Surya Namaskars to Bhagavan.
So this now it is the same Lord who is so meticulous. He's writing about the yajna which was performed by Rishishringa, where Swami goes into detail as to who was invited, what order was followed, and Rishishringa is Rishishringa. He follows it to the dot because it's a science, and every protocol was followed. Every guest was invited, and then the yajna begins. And that's how Swami goes on to say that such a massive effort was meticulously planned by Vasistha and Dasharatha himself. In fact, I
One
remember,
thing I would like to highlight here, Raju, is that when Bhagavan writes in a very beautiful way, and I've seen Swami also does that, how he sends us to welcome somebody. It seems when Rishishringa comes, Dashrath himself with Vasishta goes to receive him. Obviously, he's the head priest, so he has to be welcomed. So he go. And then they say that he washes his feet right there at the entrance and does namaskar and then very gratefully welcomes him to his place of rest. The important point which I enjoy noticing about Bhagavan's writing is that he says when the rishi is settled in his chambers, wherever they have kept him, with due protocol and everything is done, then Dashrath sits at his feet. Imagine the emperor sits at his feet and he says, pray your journey was comfortable, your parents are fine. And then he inquires about how are you and all that. And I'm forced to compare it with today's culture. Unfortunately, this language is such a crazy thing. How our culture, our language has been created that we never ask in our system of education and our system of culture. We don't ask a person when you meet somebody, how are you? That how are you is not in any Indian language. We only say pranam or namaste or anything like that, Sai Ram, Ram Ram, Namaste. and then we'll welcome them inside, give them water, and then ask, is everything okay? So it is never a first introduction like today. We have been taught the Macaulay's education that first thing you do is to say, "How are you?" Neither the person asking is interested in really knowing how you are, and nor the person who is asked will ever tell you the real story of his life.
Absolutely.
But it's a
Yes.
formality which has been created thinking, I think the protocol is because they think it's a polite way to do. But look at the real culture of our Sanatan system. The real protocol, which has the most beautiful etiquette, is not even to ask a person on the face of it, how are you? First, make him feel comfortable so that he can at least genuinely say, how I am. If a person is in front of you, first you welcome him, give him some water, make him relax, and then you say, how are you? What do you have come for? But imagine you open the door and say, why are you here? The first question is, how are you? Why are you here? So the person who wants to share will also get scared to share, or he'll try to hide himself. So that is a beauty which I notice even in descriptions, like how people are received. I have
Yes,
not
bro.
seen any dialogue in Ramayana or in any of the scriptures, including Bhagwan's version, where the person at the introduction asks this question, how are you? They will always first welcome them, thank them, and all that, and then they'll say, pray everything is well at home. So there is a very beautiful correlation. Any
In fact,
memories from your side?
yes, brother. Same. I feel same is the system followed by our Lord. Swami, if you observe the way in which Swami welcomes guests, say any of these prime ministers or the chief ministers or the important dignitaries they come, Swami first makes them comfortable, then ensure that they're seated well, that everything is taken care. It is only after that he gives them ample time. I've seen when, especially when a very close account, when the Vice President Bhairav Singh Shekhawat came, the amount of time that Swami gave him to be comfortable, because he comes from a little different background with different food habits, is tremendous. He gives them enough, more than asked time for them to completely settle down. If they are comfortable for morning darshan, you tell them no, no, it's we can meet later. Let them first get enough rest. And the question that Swami asked the boys who are attending the VIP are also very particular. Did they have breakfast? What did they have for breakfast? What time? How much did they sleep? How were the arrangements? In fact, Swami goes on to an extent of asking us to what how the order of the switches in the bathroom. How are they? First, is the light, or is the exhaust fan, or is it for something else? Such is the detailed elaboration that Swami gets into. And when finally Swami meets that particular guest, it is something to be awed. I mean, to learn. Swami is the greatest master. We just have to observe him carefully. I still remember for the first time when he had met Kalam. Swami was not asking him about anything about his tour. Swami said, are you happy? Is everything all right? Have you slept well? And then when Swami took him inside, and later the conversation went off into a different direction. But as you said, yeah, the first question is not about inquiring what is the status of your affairs, how is the status of your mind. No, it is first to make them comfortable. And we observe that even when the VIPs come, they are given enough time to settle down to meet Swami. They kind of absorb the place completely, and then they come prepared to meet Swami. I think it is also a very subtle way of telling the guest that this is our culture, this is our system. Probably when Rishishringa, or for that matter any great sage who comes in, he was also given enough time to look around and to observe the settings, the environments, the standards, and the culture of the place. And he also is given enough time to prepare himself to answer and to get to the business. I think it's a very evolved and mature way of inviting and talking to a guest.
And obviously, all the protocols are followed, and Rishishringa announces that the Homam would start in the morning time, and that's how they prepare. Invites are sent, and the list of invitees are huge. I think they come from all over the country, and that time the country was everything. So
Yes.
basically, kings came from all directions, and different kings came, and that is where this whole yajna happened. And it's a very interesting thing about the fire element of Homam. So Raju, you want to highlight about that? The
Yes, brother.
fire
In fact,
plays a lot of important role in the whole yajna process.
right. In fact, one of the discourses, Swami very clearly says that fire god is the emissary. He carries that dhwaja, the the pillar, the flag post in his chariot, is the one to which the message is tied, as per poetic descriptions, that the message that you are conveying. So, for example, if you're paying to Rudra for health, so that message is tied to the flag post, and this carrier goes to Rudra and prays that Lord, this is the message, and Rudra gives back the reply. Now, it might be a very poetic way of describing, but it appears like fire appears to be a tool of connection. I mean, there is something very deep about fire. At a physical level, yes, we talk about this being plasma, this being the fifth element, the fourth element, fourth substance, and many scientific explanations can be given. But there appears to be a very deep connotation to fire. The way in which the homums, the offerings were put, I remember in many instances where in particular samitis, yajnams were done and photographs were taken. And interestingly, so for example, when you're doing Chandi Homam, you would find the shape of the fire as a Durga, or say you're doing Sudarshana Yagam. I have seen some of these where Sudarshana Yagam was being done and the form of Krishna was, when the photo was captured, the flame was of Krishna's form, and it was shown to Swami. Swami gave a smile and said, "Yeah, Krishna, I came as Krishna," and Swami gave back. Probably we have lost that subtlety to look at those forms. I think those forms manifest. And in Treta, yes, it actually did take a form, and it comes out as that Yajna Purusha himself carrying the pot. It is like an intercontinental or intergalaxical connection.
And as the story goes, very beautifully that Homan was done, and because we don't want to go into that detail, because everybody knows the basic storyline. So, and the real Yajna Purusha appears from the fire, and the way Bhagwan explains it is so poetic and so beautiful. That effulgence with the hundred suns glowing, he's bright and beautiful, and he very beautifully hands over a pot of paisam, which is a rice pudding, to the king. And with the permission of Vasisht, he takes it, he accepts it. And then Vasisht gives him a clear, and then he says he disappears, that Yajna Purusha disappears after handing over the ball of paisam. And then Vashishta commands him or guides him that, King, please share this paisam with your wives. And there is a kind of a protocol to be followed, that they have to take bath and then consume this paisam. And Dasharath gives half of that paisam to Kaushalya, the eldest queen, and then balance one fourth to Sumitra and one fourth to Kaikai. And they all three queens go to their chambers for taking bath, and after which they were supposed to partake this paisa. And Raju, here very interesting thing happens,
Yes, brother.
and I think that is another beautiful thing to be learned from this episode, this part of events, that a thought enters Sumitra's head. The youngest queen, the middle queen of Dashrath. Raju, would you like to tell that story?
Yes, brother. In fact, Sumitra, Swami, you know, we should, when we are reading Ramakatha, I think we should ponder as to why Swami is narrating those. Swami had from a writer's perspective, there was no necessity for Swami to mention this. If you look at, there is no loss of story, but yet, why is it that the Lord is inserting these sentences in between, where Sumitra has this thought saying, she feels that anyway, Kausalya, being the eldest queen, she has the legal right for her son to be the king. If not Kausalya's son, anyway, Kaikeyi is Dasharatha is bound by the promise that he made to Kaikeyi that her son will be king one day. So it's either Kausalya's son or Kaikeyi's son. So which means that my son would end up being a servant. He would serve either Kausalya's son or Kaikeyi's son. It's just a brief streak of thought, and she reconciles herself, and she kind of comes back saying that why am I getting so negative? Why is that such thoughts are passing my head? In fact,
In
over the
fact,
last
Bhagwan, in fact, Bhagwan mentions that. He says
yes,
immediately as soon as the thought came, Kaushalya kind of slaps herself. Hey, why am thinking like that? So she
yes,
reprimands herself on this thought that why did I think everything is so beautiful? And then she continues. Please carry on.
he continues. Yes, I think it is also like over the last few sessions that we are mentioning, the times that they were in and the entities that they were made of. Every thought kind of mattered. It appears like this one singular thought again set of consequences that had great ramifications. Same was the case with Sita. When Sita was with Rama in the ashram of Agastya, she has a thought that how wonderful it would be for me to be pregnant and bring up my kids in ashram, and that's how she ends up being in Valmika's ashram, being a pregnant and bring up her two children in Valmika's ashram. Now, when in the Parnashala, when she looks at that golden deer, again one thought just crosses her mind: how wonderful it would be for me to have that golden deer. And she looks at Rama, and we know the story. It again set off many consequences that had great ramifications. She got separated from Rama. Ravana came and took her off, and we know the entire Ramayana followed. It is that one thought. Now appears like she had a thought here. Sumitra had a passing thought that I will have a servant, and probably, and she did not want to have. I mean, whatever said and done, all with due respect to Sumitra, she was not very favorable to have a servant as her son. So the sequence of events, if you look at it from then, Lord satisfied her wish also in a very beautiful manner. He says, okay, if you don't want have, if you wanted to have kings, so I will give you kings. I mean, the story goes that she goes out, she has a red bath. Now supposedly that payasam cup, which is supposed to be giving servant to her womb, she goes and she carries it outside. She's drying her hair, and strangely an eagle comes, and she just that eagle picks up that bowl and carries it. It just flies off. Now, on the other end of India, probably 1800 or 1900 kilometers from that point, on top of a hill in the current days of Hampi, it's called Anjanadri, the Anjani Devi, the mother of Hanuman, the wife of Kesari, she was sitting and praying for progeny. She wants, and what is her prayer? If you go to Hampi, even to this day, if you get onto that Anjanadri, the priest tells you that she was praying for a son who should be the greatest servant of God. That was her prayer. This am I because she is fed up with her husband being the greatest servant of the king. Her husband was always available for Vali's command. He was a beck and call of the king, and he would leave his wife, he would leave his family. Now she is fed up of someone serving the king. She wants someone to serve the Lord. And that is where Anjana Devi is praying that, please bless me with a son who can serve the god. And into her lap, this eagle throws that cup. Now, Anjani Devi feels that this is the divine cup that has been bestowed, and she takes it. On the other side, our Lady Sumitra is now shocked. She's fear stricken. She goes and tells Kausalya and Kaikeyi about the cup that is lost. So that is where they get a similar cup, and then they give half of their portions, half from Kausalya's cup and half from Kaikeyi's cup, and two halves are given, and those three queens consume those apparently three parts. But unfortunately, the two halves that were given had set off another set of consequences. And yes, brother.
Yes, I think it's a very you know, nicely explained and presented the whole thing as to how this consequence thing happens. But here, you know, when you look at this, Raju, it's very interesting to see that how a small thought, and probably because that era was so pure, people are very conscious about everything. So even a small thought could materialize into a destiny. So imagine how many thoughts do we entertain? How many thoughts we allow it to go and come? What kind of vasanas and what kind of imprints we are actually creating around us? It is scary even to
Absolutely.
think that way. And here you have an example of Mother Sita, Mother Sumitra, who had a passing thought, and that passing thought manifested in this manner. Of course, it was a divine grace attached to it. So you can say that thought, the consequence of thought, became much beautiful, and you know, it was divinely blessed. But it does highlight the importance of a thought, and look at the thought how it translated into a mother giving birth to twins does not enjoy the whole overall experience of being a mother, because the twins are always attached to their brothers in different rooms. So imagine a deprivation of a mother even after bearing two children. And that is a consequence on a physical level
Yes.
of a thought. And I don't want to call it a negative thought because that has a different connotation, but it is a thought. Right or
Yes.
wrong, we can't judge, we don't have to judge, but the fact is, it's a thought and there is a consequence. If only she would have allowed it to happen, we don't know, probably the history would have been different. Ramayana would probably be in a different, we don't know how it will be. Like, even though Bharat was not from that angle, but Bharat was equally devoted to Ram. So we can't say that Shatrughan would not. Bharat was a highly dedicated and devoted brother of Ram. So as a servant also he lived, as a king also he lived. So in both ways, the storyline may not have changed, but certainly there would have been some change. We don't know what. So that is why Bhagavan says that trust the divine play and just go with the flow. There's a lot to learn from this. That small consequences and can happen. Srinivas brother has asked a very relevant question, Raju, and he's saying that is that not even a prompting of divine? Yes, Raju. Ultimately, brother, I feel everything is divine, but since we don't know, we have not realized that we don't live in that realized state of being all the time. That is why the discussion. Otherwise, there is no discussion left. Once you believe that everything is divine, then enjoy it. So there is nothing right or wrong, as we said before. So yes, in a way, if you look at it, Ramayana had to happen. That is why when three brothers prayed for immortality, Saraswati, it seems, sat on Kumbhakaran's jiva, tongue, and instead of saying, I want Indra's palace, he said Nidra. So Indra became Nidra, the god of gods became the god of sleep. And he went on sleeping for 6 months. So, yes, it is divine will. If not that, then Ramayana would be different. So, we don't know how to interpret it. You can interpret in any ways you like. Am I right, Raju? Your input.
Yes, brother. Yes. In fact, Swami also gives this example to Bhageswar had asked this question that, Swami, uh, can I say that if everything is divine, why is it that I have to face these consequences? And Swami very forcefully, in fact, Sir had explained to us in class, he holds him and says, if you look at the gutter water, the water in the gutter, and say that that is divine, drink it. Feel that it is divine. Do not differentiate that it is not divine. But as per your convenience, you cannot say that one is divine, one is not divine. Now, when you are in that complete acceptance that everything around you is divine, yes, every thought then becomes divine. As per your convenience, if you say that this is divine, this is not divine, then you have the problem of individuality coming in and the karma sets off, working its consequences. So, if you have that supreme faith that yes, everything is prompting of divine, it is prompting out. But the question is, how firm is our faith?
Beautiful, eh? I think I love Swami's examples also. It's a very, very beautiful way of highlighting and putting the thought straight in our head. And that is how it happened. And as Bhagwan explains, in a due course, all the three brothers conceived and they were pregnant. And then they say very beautifully that on and Ram was born on the auspicious moment of Uttarayan, the divine half year, the Chaitra month, the bright fortnight, and the ninth day. That's why we call it Ram Navami, the ninth day. The Punarvasu star, it was a Monday. Lagna was Simha, the zodiac sign of lion. The period was Abhijit. It translates into period of victory. So on the Chaitra Navami is the birth of Ram. That is beautiful, eh? And then next day was born Bharat. On the Chaitra bright half, on the 10th day, it was a Tuesday, Gandha Yoga, Bharat was born. And on the 11th day, Sumitra was conceived, and Shatrughan, both twins were born. Chaitra, Ashlesha star, it was Vriddha Yoga. So ninth day Rama's birth, 10th day Bharat, and 11th day was Lakshman and Shatrughan. This is how we got the divine children. Any thought, Raju? It's such a sweet, how the Chaitra months became prominent.
Yes, brother. Yes, in fact, as Swami mentions, the entire nature celebrated the advent of Rama. There's a very beautiful discourse that Swami talks about the signs that nature gives preceding the births uh, of of personages who can affect history in either ways. When Ravana was about to take birth, there was lot of rain, floods, and thunderstorms. It was essentially nature was kind of crying, and wolves were howling, and there were
Yeah,
firestorms,
yes.
and comes Ravana onto the stage. On the other side, we have Sri Ramachandra. When he was taking birth, he says it was said that the moon was much brighter than the usual self. The entire the trees have blossomed. There was breeze. It's a very beautiful aroma in the air, and there is a celebration in the air. There is that festivity in the air, and these have I cannot explain it in words, but I have observed. I'm sure you also must have observed. But on some occasions, when we sit in Swami's presence, we know that the air is different somehow. We can't explain it how or why, but we certainly know that there is that festivity in the air. We do not know why or how. But the way Swami behaves, the way Swami looks, there is that electricity that is running in the air. You can feel it, but you can't explain it.
Raju, you
That's
have
how.
perfectly, you are absolutely dot on. Because in Prashanti Nilayam, when you step out of the Mandir campus,
Right.
there are shops and there's a market and all that. From there, when you walk towards Mandir, Shanti Mandir, the weather changes. And the moment
Absolutely.
you enter Mandir, as if you are not in this earth, it's different. It's a
Exactly.
foreign land. The air is fresh. You can see the sky, and and yes, you're absolutely right. When Bhagwan walks in, then the environment gets still further magical. I don't know how it gets so fresh. It gets so clean and fresh. I still can't understand it, and it is so amazing. Even you can feel it. You can smell that chaos. It is so different.
Yes, brother. In fact,
So,
that is how our Rama's advent also happens. And Swami explains on another occasion when the Meghanath was taking birth, there were so many thunderstorms, and this kid also comes out and roars like the thunder, and that's how he gets the name Meghnad. But on the other side, when Lakshmana was taking birth, when the Ashlesha star, which also happens to be quite close for Shiva's Ganas, now there were clouds that were passing, but they were passing beautifully. It's like those misty clouds that you see in the hill stations like Ooty or Manali, where you see those misty, beautiful clouds. It's actually cloudy, and there is that thunder, but yet it is the rumbling. It's not thunder, and you enjoy that pleasantness in the air. And there is a deep contrast. And why is that? Because it is Lakshmana who ends up killing that Meghanatha, and the nature is using the same symbols to convey the same message. And Ravana has this, there is a firestorm, and Rama was being born, or rather, when his body is emerging out of mother's womb, that entire sun begins to shine brightly. It is that fire element again. Nature is providing very subtle signs that these entities would face off one against another, and the good will prevail over bad. And Bharata, as the scriptures explain, when Bharata was taking birth, it seems many birds were the parrots that we kind of currently extol them as the singers of Rama's name. No, they many of them it seems have assembled on the palace, on the out on the gates of the palace, and they were kind of croaking at the same time. Like when for example when these parrots croak, it sounds like Rama. If you observe carefully, it sounds like Rama, and all of them were kind of singing at the same time, heralding the birth of Bharata, or a great devotee of Rama. A poet also compares Bharata to a parrot that who continuously chanted Rama's name, and he himself turned into in the physical appearance as Rama. So nature was providing more than enough signs to people to read as to what these beings would grow up to be.
beautiful. In fact, Bhagwan explains it very nicely. Uh, Actually, he gives a correlation of the naming ceremony. And when Dasharatha says to Vashish, Guru, when should we do the naming? Even Vashish says that since there are three mothers, but they have one father. So from the date of the firstborn, we will calculate 10 days of the Sutak. In Indian tradition, we have that impurity time, which is very interesting. That discussion can happen sometimes later because that itself is a huge area of discussion. So Sutak was applied, and there were 10 days, and was calculated from the day of the firstborn, which is Rama's birth. So on the 10th day, uh, see, the 10 days Sutak was done. On the 11th day, the naming ceremony was organized. So that means when Lakshman and Bharat were born, that is a time when he says 11th day we can have the naming ceremony. And there he starts talking about the whole attributes as you were mentioning so beautifully. And Bhagavan also mentioned, in fact, he says when Rama was born, everybody was peacefully sleeping. There was a calm and peace everywhere. People were happy for no reason. And Vashisht, in fact, says that the way he has brought joy to his mother Kaushalya, he would bring the same joy to the whole mankind. And his virtue will bring solace and confer joy and happiness to one and all.
Yes, brother.
Yes.
And
So that is what he says. Rama, and he gives the word Ram is his name, and which means he who pleases. And there are a lot of meanings to that, but Rama is one whom he who pleases everybody. And from Shiv Puran, we know that Ram word was conceived by Shiva himself. So if you look at Vashishta, he never says that I have named Ram. The beauty of it is that he would always say that, they will close their eyes and say his name is Ram. I love
right,
that. I don't know why I notice these things from Bhagwan. That when the version is written, that he's not saying that Vashishta names him. Vashishta closes his eyes, and when he opens, he says these things about Ram, and he says his name is Ram. So as if you have heard from somebody and you're just announcing it here, hey, his name is Ram. Same way it was decided for Krishna also. It is so amazing that how these rishis, converse and convey this great tidings. And then you have this twins, and Vashish looks at Sumitra's twin children, and he says the elder one would be a hero, a stalwart fighter, endowed with vast wealth, and he knew that he'll be a great service to God and his consort Lakshmi, and that service would be for him like the very life, and so he gives him the name Lakshman. So Lakshman means the one who has served the God and his consort. And he considered Lakshman, the life breath, serving as his life breath. And then he looks at his younger brother, which is younger by maybe a few seconds or few minutes, I don't know. And he says he would be a formidable destroyer of enemies and continued followers in the footsteps of his elder brothers. He'll be always content following the footsteps. And he therefore blessed him with Shatrughna. So his name was the slayer of enemies, Shatrughna. And then he looks at the Keikai's son. The chronology, look at how Bhagavan explains. Vashishta gazes at Kaikai and he knew that he will fill all hearts with love and joy and amaze all by his unbelievable adherence to Dharma. So that personality will rule over his subjects with compassion and affection. And so he gave him Bharat. That Bharat name is actually a Sanskrit word which we normally use it for husband. He's a Bharata because he takes care. So the connotation of naming him Bharat was that he will nurture his people, take care of them. So he named him Bharat, that he'll be a compassionate ruler. And this is amazing. I really wish, that we have Hanuman's story. Do you know about Hanuman? When was he born?
yes, brother. And in fact, some of the brothers also have added the comment. Interestingly, Hanuman was born on Chaitra Purnima. If ninth was the day of Rama's birth, 10th was Bharata, 11th was Shatrughna and Lakshmana, then 15th happens to be the birth date of Hanuman.
Lovely. So they're all in sequence.
Same sequence. And similar signs follow Hanuman's birth. That the wind, there is an aroma that fills the wind, and as they say that it begins to kind of drizzle beautifully when Hanuman was about to take birth. It's as if the mother nature was blessing that a great servant of the God is going to set forth. And I'm sure similar would have been the case of naming of Hanuman's body. He had many names, and the most
Hanuman
popular
was
one is
actually
Hanuman.
not his name, right? Hanuman was
Right,
not his
right.
name.
It was not his name. It was not.
Yeah, it was given as a when he got hit and his
Yes.
cheek got pressed, and that is where he got
Hmm.
Hanuman. He got that Hanuman name.
Yes.
So
Yes.
he was. I don't know about the story of his ceremonious name. I think he was called Anjaneya first, right?
Yeah, for Anjani Putra. That's why he
Ah,
becomes Anjaneya, the
Anjaneya.
son of Anjani.
Yeah. What do you know the exact name which was given by his parents to him? I think Anjaneya. I'm not
I think it
sure.
was Anjaneya.
Yeah, Anjaneya was his name, and Hanuman he gets when he gets the hit, and he gets Hanu in there. So that is a cheek which he gets hit.
Yes.
So, but it is nice. Thank you,
Yes, and
Saurabh. Saurabh brother has also mentioned that is Hanuman's birth happens to be in Chaitra Purnima. Yes, and actually, Raju, you also know that you mentioned once that in that area people do believe that Anjaneya got a paisam from an eagle bird.
yes, yes,
That they
exactly. In
know.
fact, yes, if we go on to the top of that Anjanatri hill, it is currently Hampi. It is 5 or 6 kilometers from Hampi. It's a very famous tourist spot. Anybody, any guide, tour guide, you ask him to take around, he will definitely take you to this top of the hill. It's a huge mound. It's a massive rock. You climb onto that, and he shows you the spot where Anjani Devi was sitting, and now there's a temple. The priest invariably explains this story. In fact, they don't have the first half of the story, which was given by Swami himself. The second half they have. What they say is Anjani Devi was sitting and she was praying for the son, who should be able servant of the god, and suddenly out of nowhere comes an eagle with a silver cup, and then that eagle drops the silver cup in the womb of in the lap of Anjani, and the eagle flies away. And that's how they say that it is the divine blessing that has come in the form of the payasam. Now, if you connect it to
Beautiful,
the other side, Swami gives the story as to where that payasam was actually taken up.
lovely, wonderful. I think I'll take one more question. Any other questions have come? Saurabh, brother Saurabh had mentioned he could not follow the true collaboration between humans and nature, and he puts bracket devas, and might end conflict. Uh, Raju, you want to take it? I just want to add here that, Brother Saurabh, it is not a collaboration between humans and nature. It is humans and devas. Devas are not nature. So when we say Indra Dev, it does not mean that the Indra is rain. It is like saying Dasharatha is the king of Ayodhya. He is not Ayodhya. So the gods who govern the nature is different than the nature itself. So humans and devas collaborate to take care of the nature. The creation is being nurtured and taken care by this element of creation, which is human and devas. Am I right? So
Yes, brother, I
you want to
completely
add
kind of
something?
agree. In fact, if you go to the story of Krishna's, the way in which Krishna lifted Govardhanagiri, that entire story comes up from here. That Indra was being prayed to bless them with rains. Now, since Indra was not prayed, Krishna turns around the entire culture and says, "Let's pray to Govardhanagiri," to punch a hole into Indra's ego. And Indra kind of gets quite angry. All of us know the story that he showers, he kind of inundates the entire village of Krishna, and Krishna lifts up Govardhanagiri and takes care of. And so the story is that Swami mentions the story and says that one thing that all of us should observe is these managers are appointed to take care of the various wings of nature. In fact, when Swami was traveling when Professor Nandanjaya was with Swami in the car, when Swami was traveling, it was quite shiny summer, and Swami shows to Professor, and suddenly it starts getting cloudy. And this professor mentioned that Swami, it might rain, and Swami says, "No, my managers wouldn't work out of turn. They are very sincere. Unlike your managers, if the boss is around, these managers work, your managers work, but my managers are not like that. They are very sincere. Even when I'm not around, they work." And Swami says, for rain, there is a manager. For wind, there is a manager. And he goes on to explain. In fact, he drives a beautiful message. He says, now, when you write particular messages relating to this aspect of rain, it is sent to this manager of rain, or to this vice president of water, or to this vice president of food. Now, what are those prayers that directly come to me? Swami gives a beautiful answer. He says, only that prayer which is pure, which comes from purity, which is filled with love, and which comes from spiritual practice. Only that prayer which has any of these three qualities come directly to me. And any prayer that comes directly to the managing director has all the powers to overthrow all other decisions. So, for example, at some points, wind god may not agree because it might harm the division of rain god. So the prayer would be answered partially. But when it comes to managing that, he can make adjustments such a way that entire thing falls in place and the desire is uh, kind of blessed or taken care. This was, in fact, the explanation given by Swami. The point is, there also Swami is mentioning about these devatas being managers of various systems of nature. I think, unfortunately, with our English system of education, we have lost uh, touch of those managers and the nuances.
And this is where he says that there should be a collaboration between devas and manavas to stabilize, to maintain balance in the creation and help both towards progressing towards God realization. So, in fact, devatas also need, assistance to move forward, and humans also need assistance. So that is a very beautiful thing that we understand that devas are managers, but they need people to work. They need people to collaborate and help, and so there can be anybody who can become a manager tomorrow. So that is why humans have the caliber to become devas tomorrow.
Absolutely, yes,
So
sir.
it's a chain which goes on. It's a beautiful thing. Swami's examples are Bhagwan is so simple. He makes it in such a way that you can't help but acknowledge it. Yeah, it sounds so logical and simple.
Right.
Wonderful.
In fact,
Thank
as
you,
you
brother.
said, yes, brother.
Sorry.
No, I'm just adding to the point. As you said, the humans kind of are given those positions or the responsibilities of managers. Like, for example, take the case of Hanuman. He's supposed to be the next Brahma. Or take the case of Ashwatthama. He's supposed to be the next Vyasa.
Yes.
The reason why Vyasa scolds the Veda Vyasa, Badarayana, he scolds Ashwadhama when he releases Brahmastra is because he says, you are supposed to be the next Vyasa. How can you be so foolish? Or take the case of, for example, many other observers like Narada. So they say that even Narada is also kind of a position that kind of keeps going around. Or Indra, that is also a position that one person after another is elevated to that position.
Wonderful. Raju, brother, we'll continue this beautiful journey next week again, and we'll look at the divine children, their further pranks and glories, and then look at how Bhagavan explains this and how he did it himself in his childhood. So, and I thank you all for joining us and participating in this beautiful offering tonight. And I always welcome your questions, your suggestions, and your thoughts. And we'd love to hear more. And we'll continue to bring this amazing story next week with Bhagwan's grace. So I seek your permission and offer our gratitude to Bhagwan for giving us this blessed opportunity to continue listening and remembering him in his beautiful journey. Thank you very much, and Sai Ram to all of you. I think Raju brother is here, so just let him also say Sai Ram before we close. Sorry, Raju.
Sorry, brother.
Yes,
Yeah,
final word before we close. Yes,
yes, brother. I think as Swami beautifully explains about Rama's birth, there's a beautiful point that Swami once mentions. He says, if you follow the values lived by Rama, the Rama in you will manifest to the
so
world.
sweet,
And I think this is what
so
is our
sweet.
responsibility, that we should live the values followed by the Lord.
Excellent. Thank you, brother. Thank you, Raju. We'll meet again,
Yes,
hopefully
brother.
and prayerfully by Bhagwan's grace. We'll continue this journey, and I welcome all of you to this video will be uploaded on the channel. You're welcome to watch and share, and do share your thoughts and suggestions for our improvement. Thank you. Sai Ram to everybody. Good night. Sai Ram
Yeah.
Bhaiya.